U.S. President Joe Biden weighed in today on President-elect Donald Trump's tariff threat on goods from Canada and Mexico. Trump posted on Truth Social earlier this week that he would slap a 25% tariff on all goods from both countries. Biden responded to the move while visiting first responders for the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday.
I hope he rethinks it. I think it's a counterproductive thing to do. You know, look, one of the things you've heard me say before that we have an unusual situation in America. We're surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and two allies, Mexico and Canada. And the last thing we need to do is begin to screw up those relationships.
So, should Canada retaliate to Trump's tariffs? One economic expert says, let's hold off for now. Let's bring in Karl Schamotta, the chief market strategist at Corpay, a corporate payments company that helps consumers and businesses pay their expenses. He joins us from Toronto this evening. Good to see you, Karl.
You as well.
Okay, so let's explore why you think that we should hold off on retaliating. Why is that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, we should retaliate to some degree. I've been joking that we should send a bunch of Canada geese down to chase Donald Trump around his golf course. But you know, and I do think that the Canadian government should look for win-win solutions, right? Things like tightening border controls, ending supply management, ramping up defense spending, perhaps. Those are things that we should be doing anyway, and you know, they might help to diffuse the situation a bit. But you know, ultimately, appeasement really shouldn't go too far. History does suggest that Trump is not negotiating in good faith. It's very likely that he's going to come back with additional demands at a later date. And more importantly, you know, Napoleon said, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake.
Right.
This is a situation in which, you know, Trump's policies are going to land very, very heavily on the U.S. population itself. And so, you know, to some very big extent here, we should probably let this thing play out and let, you know, opposition within the U.S. eventually reverse what Trump is proposing to do.
And do you think that pressure is coming internally, domestically, for the incoming president?
Oh, yes. Already, you know, business groups in the U.S. are already mounting opposition. And, you know, economists even within his own administration, including some of the people that he has appointed to cabinet, are all, you know, sort of voicing this sort of objection and saying, you know, if you want to raise taxes by this much on the middle class in the United States, that's really turning your back on the people who helped to put you into power. So don't do this, you know, do it at a more gradual pace and focus on the countries that are really taking advantage of the United States, like, you know, China, for example.
So 25% is the number that he has put out there. That may not end up being the final number, the final percentage, but it could be significant. How do you foresee Canada's key industries being impacted by significant tariffs imposed by the U.S.?
It could be terrible. And you know, on that point, I should definitely refer you to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. They just put out a great study authored by Trevor Toome. And basically what he's suggesting is that if this 25% tariff comes through, you're looking at a 2.5% hit to Canadian GDP. Which means essentially that a 25% tariff would drive the Canadian economy into recession and impose costs on, you know, virtually every consumer and business in Canada.
You said that, you know, trade cost levels last seen in the run-up to the Great Depression. Elaborate on that a little bit. Is it that dire right now?
Yes, if we see this sort of increase, U.S. tariff rates on average would go up to about 10% of all the imports that are going into the United States. And the last time we got to something like that level was just ahead of the Great Depression. So when the Smoot-Hawley tariff bills were passed, you know, just before 1930, what happened was we essentially slowed the entire global economy, impacted the U.S. economy in a terrible way, worsened the Great Depression, and helped to set the stage for the Second World War. So, you know, this is not a period of history that we want to go back to. It's not something that really makes sense from any fundamental perspective. And unfortunately, right now, it seems as if emotions are driving the bus, not logical, a logical appraisal of history.
How do you think that the federal government is handling this thus far? I mean, the Prime Minister met with the premiers yesterday. Some premiers have come out and said that we do have to tighten up the border. We do have to get the more policing down there, invest in the RCMP. We heard from the Public Safety Minister yesterday that we may see additional investment there. So how do you think the federal government has handled it and should be handling it moving forward?
I think that's very reasonable thus far, right? It does shine a light on some deficiencies that Canada has, and I do think that symbolic step at least is going to help to address the problem, right? And this is sort of part and parcel of Trump's strategy, is that he does like to open with these extreme negotiation stances. And eventually walks them back. And so, I think the Canadian government is counting on that. And I also think that, steps in recent days to sort of form a Team Canada approach in which the premiers work with the federal government is something that pays off. And then, lastly, I think, the big thing that we should all take out of this is that free trade is good. It's good for the Canadian economy. We should, have free trade with the U.S., but we should also remove interprovincial trade barriers. So I'm kind of hoping that at some point here, leaders in Canada talk to one another and realize that they should, really focus on the problems at home and not worry quite as much about what's happening south of the border, because we simply don't have much control over that.
How much does the personal relationship, because we know that Trump has personal relationships with many world leaders, how much does the personal relationship between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump factor into these negotiations?
Quite unknown to me, but at the same time, it is very clear that Trump does work on that basis, and they had a frosty relationship during his first term. So
right.
I don't think that this is a smooth process. It's going to be very difficult for Trudeau to sort of overcome those challenges. And at the end of the day, it's going to require actually putting something on the table, right? Now, that being said, if we look at past negotiations, it's often been symbolic. China managed to ratchet down the tensions very dramatically last time by promising to buy a bunch of stuff that they never did buy. So, at the end of the day, the personal relationship matters, but, it's really about the political posturing that'll come out of this. And you have to play to, Trump's predilections there in order to make that work.
Right. Karl, we got to leave it there. Appreciate your time and insight on this one. That is Karl Schamotta, Chief Market Strategist for Corpay.